Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we are continuing with the How Redheads Built the Pyramids series, reading segments and chapters from Michael TSARION's book, The Irish Origins of Civilization. This is a amazing chapter. I'm, somebody who's interested in history of all kinds, Irish history specifically, because I'm of Irish descent, and I've just, it's so interesting how the mythological and the historical are fused. And, that's never really been properly explained. It's kind of always dismissed by the usual suspects of, Oxford, historians and, all the academic scholar elite, right? But this is a great chapter, and it's one of the longer ones so far, so I'll just jump into it. Chapter 4, The Atlanteans Arrive. Quote, "The Greeks in their myths and legends always placed the Hesperides in the farthest west. Jordanus, the Gothic historian, described the north as the forge of mankind." End quote, Commons Beaumont, The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain. The student who contemptuously or ignorantly dismisses the existence of Atlantis and other pre-Diluvian civilizations will never understand the true history of Ireland. Recognition of the existence and importance of Atlantis is an essential prerequisite to the study of the world, and particularly of the British Isles and Scandinavia. To acknowledge the existence of pre-Diluvian empires is to have the clouds of darkness over Ireland's prehistory disperse. The veils and webs of confusion are removed, while scintillating beams of light illuminate the mysteries of that great country's ancient past. The history of Ireland is commonly divided into two main cycles, the mythological and the historical. The former deals with ages when Ireland was colonized by fantastic races whose recorded skill and sophistication confound modern historians, who rather we believe the accounts to be inaccurate and fanciful. Segmenting Ireland's prehistory in this manner was a cunning ruse to make it easier for historians and clerics to dismiss and denounce the many spectacular accounts of advanced weaponry and machinery, technical ability, and aesthetic and magical prowess to be found throughout the mythic accounts. Quote, "Unlike the natives of Britain and Scotland, the Irish in pre-Christian times were not brought into contact with Roman institutions or Roman culture. In consequence, they created and developed a civilization of their own that was in some respects without equal. They were far advanced in the knowledge of metalwork and shipbuilding. They engaged in commerce, they loved music, and had an acquaintance with letters. And when disputes arose among them, these were settled in duly constituted courts of justice, presided over by a trained lawyer called a brehon, instead of being settled by the stern arbitrament of force. Druidism was their pagan creed. They believed in the immortality and in the transmigration of souls. They worshipped the sun and the moon, and they venerated mountains, rivers, and wells. It would be difficult to find any ministers of religion who were held in greater awe than the Druids." End quote. Joseph Dunn, Glories of Ireland, 1914. The majority of texts dealing with Ireland's prehistory, particularly texts dealing with Brehon law and the ways of the Druids, sit, as they have done for centuries, untranslated in Dublin archives. Translated manuscripts in the public domain were chiefly composed by monks between the 12th and 16th centuries AD, a long time after the events they refer to occurred. Among these old manuscripts are the following: Book of the Dun Crow, Book of Leinster, Book of Ballymote, Book of Munster, Book of Lecan, Book of Lismore, Book of Fermoy, Book of High Main, or Book of the O'Kellys, Book of Deer, Book of Olams, Book of Macarigal, Book of Durrow, Book of Lindisfarne, Chronicon Sectorum, Annals of Tigernach, Annals of Ballymacmanus, Annals of Boyle, Annals of Connaught, Annals of Ulster, Annals of Innisfallen, Annals of Clonmacnoise, Annals of the Four Masters, the Liber Gabala, aka the Book of Invasions, the Book of Kells, the Mabinogion, the Scotichronicon, Black Book of Carmarthen, Red Book of Hergest, Book of Aneurin, and the Triads of Taliesin. From the writings of monks and historians, we discover that there were 7 major phases or waves of invasion, and that colonization to Ireland after the Great Deluge believed to have occurred shortly after creation. Although there is little consensus on the order of visitation during the mythological cycle, the order of arrival and occupation usually delineated is as follows. First, the Fomorians. A race of Cyclopean Titans, they were the earliest inhabitants of Ireland and Britain and can be considered aboriginal. They regarded every other race as invaders and sought to repel all who attempted to settle the land. Although the monks and mythmongers chose to portray this ancient race as demonic, the true identity of the Fomorians is yet to be disclosed. Enigmatically, their king Ilethan is described as the most physically beautiful man to have ever existed. The name of his son, Breas, is synonymous with the English word beautiful. Despite monkish attempts to demonize this race, we can rationally conclude that the Fomorians were not only Ireland's earliest inhabitants, but were the survivors of the fall of Atlantis and the primordial Arctic homeland. Next are the people of Kisair, the granddaughter of Noah, daughter of Bith. She allegedly arrived 40 days before the biblical flood. Next are the children of Partholon, arrival dated estimated to be 2550 BC. They came from the west and were quickly decimated by war and disease. Next were the children of Nemed, arrival dated 2859 BC. They too were wasted by war and disease. Their mass grave is allegedly to be found outside Dublin. Next were the Iberians, also known as the Fir Bolg, the Fir Gallion, and the Fir Domnan. And next were the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of the goddess Danu, arrived from islands in the northwest, devastated in a ferocious cataclysm. Their arrival date is presumed to be approximately 2000 BC. The Dedanan were Ireland's most mysterious inhabitants and were possessed of great physical and mental powers. Suggestively, like all the early settlers, the Dedanan approached Ireland from the west, that is, from the Atlantic side. Next were the children of Meal, the Goidelic Celts, officially presumed to have come from Scythia and Spain around 500 BC, but were probably in Ireland 1,000 years earlier. It is important for us to analyze this order and fathom what the monks who archived Ireland's myths were attempting to obscure. For let us not doubt that there has been considerable obscuration from Christian sources when it comes to Ireland's prehistory, particularly in regards to event dating. What has written and codified is not as important as what has not been written and admitted. And the omissions, once rediscovered and understood, change everything we know about the history of Ireland and the world. In my opinion, the tale concerning the second visitation to Ireland is a spurious interpolation with no historical veracity whatsoever. It was a cunning interpolation of Christian monks intended to insinuate an Eastern origin for the Irish. Kisair, we read, came to Ireland with a handful of people a mere 40 days before the great flood sent by God. Allegedly, she was a daughter to a son of Noah. The only part of the account we can agree with is the detail concerning the great flood. We accept wholeheartedly that such a deluge did occur in ancient times. The rest of the tale is nothing but a monkish concoction. After all, could this Kisair of the Christians and Jews be responsible for Ireland's innumerable astronomically aligned megalithic sites? We think not. One could make a case for the spuriousness of other visitation accounts, particularly of Partholon and Nemed. Their story of arrival, dated by the monks to 2520 BC, may be based on fact, although there is something contrived about the accounts of their fate afterward. Conveniently for the monkish mythmongers, but inconveniently for everyone else trying to make sense of ancient Irish history, both contingents, Partholons and Nemedians, are on separate occasions stricken with disease after their successful wars against the Fomorians. A short time after their arrival, each group is entirely decimated by plague. Not one man, woman, or child survived. These tribes exist only in story form. They came, conquered, and tragically died. Was this the device used by monks eager to manufacture the kind of dramatic history that corroborates biblical accounts? No one will know for sure until the vaults and archives in Dublin, London, and Rome are opened to the world. Quote, "Then, upon the same fatal 1st of May, there began a mysterious epidemic which lasted a week and destroyed them all. In premonition of their end, they foregathered upon the original first created plain, then called Sen Mag, or the Old Plain, so that those who survived might more easily bury those that died." End quote. Charles Squire, Celtic Myth and Legend. Quote, "The Nemedians were akin to the Partholons. Both of them came from the mysterious regions of the dead, though later Irish accounts, which endeavored to reconcile this mythical matter with Christianity, invented for them a descent from scriptural patriarchs and an origin in earthly lands, such as Spain or Scythia." End quote. Thomas Rolleston, Myths and Legends of the Celtic Race, 1911. Accounts describing the Fomorians are also to be sensibly reappraised. Chroniclers portray this Cyclopean race as semi-demonic, although their kings Ilathan and Breas are described as the most physically handsome of men. According to various legends, the Fomorians, also known as the Men of Lochlan or Lakeland, lived on or under the sea. Behaving like zealous and ruthless security guards, they attacked every tribe attempting to settle or resettle lands they considered theirs by right. Their attitude is somewhat understandable given that they remained in situ despite the titanic geological havoc that forced other groups to flee the region. Readers might justifiably ask whether there is an ounce of truth behind depictions of this strange, warlike hybrid race of great ugliness and beauty. Were the Fomorians another concoction of the monks, or is there something else we need to know about the pre-Diluvian world? In any case, by portraying the Aboriginal Irish as demonic in character and appearance, the monks verified biblical accounts of a pre-Adamic planet infested with renegade angels and evil devils. Quote, "There is no legend of the Fomorians coming into Ireland, nor were they regarded at any time as a regular portion of the population. They were coeval with the world itself." End quote, Thomas Rolleston. Quote, "The Partholans, it is said, had to do battle with a strange race called the Fomorians. They were a huge, misshapen, violent, and cruel people, representing, we may believe, the powers of evil." Quote, "With a host of these demons, Partholan fought for the lordship of Ireland and drove them out to the northern seas, whence they occasionally harried the country under its later rulers." Quote, "The Fomorians were then enabled to establish their tyranny over Ireland. They had at this period two kings, Mork and Conan. The stronghold of the Fomorian power was on Tory Island, a fit home for this race of mystery and horror. They extracted a crushing tribute from the people of Ireland, 2/3 of all the milk and 2/3 of the children of the land. At last, the Nemedians rise and revolt. Led by 3 chiefs, they land on Tory Island, capture Conan's tower, and Conan himself falls by the hand of the Nemedian chief Fergus. But Mork at this moment comes into the battle with a fresh host and utterly routs the Nemedians, who are all slain but 30. In short, I have doubts about the descriptions and timelines presented by Christian monks. I suspect there have been interpolations, distortions, omissions, and deliberate misinterpretations, and that the truth about the history of the British Isles has hitherto not been made public. However, it is one thing to suspect that deception has occurred and another to discover reasons for it. If the monks and chroniclers of Ireland's history were intentionally deceptive, as I believe them to have been, then what was it they were intent upon hiding? What facts about Ireland and its various races drove Christian monks to such lengths? Why, for instance, do we read that Ireland was an uninhabited land before the arrival of Kisair and the Nemedians? Is there not something markedly suspicious about the way Ireland was presented to us by its first historians? Quote, "At this remote time, Ireland consisted of only one treeless, grassless plain, watered by 3 lakes and 9 rivers." End quote. Charles Squire, Celtic Myth and Legend. We may accept the idea of Ireland's nakedness once we accept that it was caused by the cataclysm science has now proven to have occurred over 10,000 years ago. This terrific disaster, explored at length in Atlantis, Alien Visitation, and Genetic Manipulation, was recorded in the legends of old and by the monks who collated the myths and legends of the British Isles. When a natural disaster wreaks havoc, it destroys and, if sufficiently violent, will force people to flee their habitats. Lands so afflicted are deserted by those who have lost homes and settlements to tsunami, hurricane, typhoon, or volcano. Those who are so displaced are compelled to seek refuge in less ravaged regions. So when we read that Ireland was largely uninhabited after the time of the biblical flood, we understand it to have been inhabited before that destructive event took place. It might also be logical to suspect those indigenous occupants to be the same people who were displaced by the upheavals and who returned to their homes after a semblance of normalcy returned to their ancestral climes. This is what happens today during a natural disaster and its aftermath. It happens today and it happened in the past. Once we accept this simple premise, we make sense of the convoluted stories composed by mythmongers regarding Ireland's prehistory. These deceptive writers sought to begin Ireland's history from the time of the returns, and this falsity can no longer be accepted by those intent on researching the west to east movement of the elements of civilization. The monks busy editing Ireland's history were not interested in having their readers find out about the advanced pre-Diluvian civilizations that existed long before the time posited for the creation as described in the Old Testament. Consequently, they were compelled to write their histories as we find them today. They were bound to present Ireland as an unpopulated country frequented by demonic titans who preferred to live on remote islands and high seas. Most importantly, they were bound to have the world believe that Ireland was first inhabitants by immigrants from the east. Their deception has worked its magic. This is exactly what the vast majority of historians and interested parties believe about Ireland. What needs to be understood, and what we are adamantly convinced must now be disclosed, is that these migrations from the east did indeed occur. The tribes from the mythological cycle did indeed enter Ireland from the east, but they were not coming to Ireland from that direction for the first time. These settlers were returning after prolonged periods of forced exodus. They were the descendants of indigenous peoples returning to begin the resettlement of their ancestral habitat. On returning, they found their aspirations compromised by the return of other migrants from the east and the arrival of those coming in for the first time to invade and conquer. The maintenance of order and security would have been dependent upon constant vigilance and a concerted aggressive resistance against hostile newcomers. This is what we deduce from various legends. It is this regard, at least we can assume, that the records of battles between rival races common to the mythological cycle are generally accurate. Chroniclers betray the fact that they did not know about the land bridges that once existed between Ireland and England, and between England and Scandinavia. These land bridges existed up until 3000 BC when rising sea levels obliterated them. Satellite photography has recently confirmed the theories of geologist Professor Ulf Erlingsson, who set about proving the existence of these bridges. His findings have had a most important effect on false ideas concerning the remoteness of the British Isles. His scientific discoveries verify that Britain was a part of Atlantis and confirm our suspicions concerning the historical inversion perpetrated by Christian monks who wished it to appear that Eastern immigrants had first colonized an unoccupied Ireland. As said, the monks were not inclined to accept or admit the earth had been host to advanced pre-Diluvian civilizations, or that the earth itself was over 4,000 years old. Whatever existed was mentioned in the Bible, and there was little to add. What was contained in the Bible was all a monk had to know about his world. For the Christian, there could be no Atlantis or Lemuria. The Bible did speak of giants and fallen angels, so a scribe could permissibly claim the Fomorians to be of such a lineage. The Bible did speak of technically endowed Adamites and Canaanites, so a scribe could permissibly admit that the Iberians and Tuatha De Danann were technically sophisticated. If it corroborated the Bible, it was entered as history. If it did not corroborate the Bible, it was skewed and suppressed. For these reasons, it is irrational to believe that the scribes of Ireland have provided us with historically accurate accounts of the Western world. We can merely endeavor to take on board newly discovered scientific evidence about Ireland and its geographical tribulations, and surmise what we have not been told. Once we have an idea of what was omitted from the annals and chronicles, we are able to gradually reconstruct the facts about pre-Diluvian Ireland. Quote, 3 divine and heroic cycles of myths are known in Ireland, one telling of the Tuatha De Danann, the others of Cuchulainn, and the others of the Fians. They are distinct in character and contents, but the gods of the first cycle often help the heroes of the other groups, as the gods of Greece and India assisted the heroes of the epics. We shall see that some of the personages of these cycles may have been known in Gaul. They were remembered in Wales, but in the Highlands, where stories of Cuchulainn and Fionn are still told, the Tuatha De Danann are less known, as the new Achaean religion in Greece and the Vedic sacred books of India regarded the aboriginal gods and heroes as demons and goblins. So did Christianity in Ireland sometimes speak of the older gods there. In my reappraisal, I conclude that the Fomorians were Atlanteans. We understand that the British Isles and Scandinavia were part of the Hyperborean or Atlantean civilization. The Fomorians were also known as the men of Lochlann. This is a reference to Norway, land of lakes. Although the Fomorians took to the seas in order to survive the after effects of the deluge, they did not evacuate northwestern climes as other tribes had. They made use of the land masses that remained above water level. They attempted, as best they could, to police those lands which, though wrecked by disaster, would once again be habitable. They attempted to aggressively repel any tribe or contingent attempting to return and resettle on lands they claimed either by right or might. We conclude that the megalithic people, the original inhabitants of Ireland, hurriedly evacuated the torn lands by fleeing across the land bridges into Europe. Later, after a semblance of normality returned, the descendants of the indigenous but displaced inhabitants of Ireland and England made their way back across the same land bridges now lost beneath the waves of the Irish and North Sea. What I deny, and deny utterly, is that these indigenous people, of whatever race, were visiting the British Isles from the east for the first time. I adamantly maintain that the Partholans, Numidians, and Dedanan of the history books had occupied Ireland millennia before the Age of Catastrophe dispersed them to the corners of the world, and that they originated in western climes. To the eastern lands they went, taking their skills and expertise in so many areas. And there they may have remained for as long a period as 5,000 years. In that time they and their descendants, inveterate rovers and intrepid explorers, visited France, Spain, Babylon, Syria, Africa, Egypt, China, and other places further afield. I believe they maintained settlements in Sumeria and Egypt, and that they were known and welcomed as far east as the Indus Valley until the drying up of the great Saraswati River, which devastated the region. Indeed, not a month goes by without evidence coming forth confirming the presence of Western men in the far-off reaches of the world. The father of King Partholan was known as Sera. This name, which connotes the West, was the term that noble Egyptians gave to their kings, known by the Greek term pharaoh. In Punjabi, the term Sera is close to the words for head, Sira, sun, Surya, and lion, Shera. I conclude that the Partholans frequented Egypt and were regarded as a Western nobility. The name of Partholan's father was actually his title. He was probably the son of a king or pharaoh, possibly of the 2nd or 3rd dynasty, one whose ancestors went to Egypt from Ireland or Scythia after the cataclysm. Ancient Irish and Scottish records admit the connections between Irish and Egyptian nobility. Partholan is said to have come into Ireland from the west, where beyond the vast unsailed Atlantic Ocean, the Irish fairyland, the land of the living, i.e. the land of the happy dead, was placed. His father's name was Sera, meaning the West. End quote. Thomas Rolliston. Quote, for all these peoples, whether Hyperboreans, Cimmerians, Cimbrian, or even Tuatha De Danann, are represented as belonging to a race of mysterious origins which lives at the ends of the earth and was supposedly driven from its original home. In mythological terms, they are all Tuatha De Danann. The Tuatha De Danann were the ancient inhabitants of Ireland who were forced to give way to the Gaels and to become the gods of Celtic imagination, the lords of the subterranean world. There is no doubt that the name Tuatha De Danann was given to the pre-Celtic inhabitants of Ireland, and that it must have been they who built the megaliths. Their uncertain origins, combined with their curious stone constructions, give them a cloak of mystery. If the Celts drove out the megalithic peoples of Ireland, there is no reason why the same thing should not have happened on the continent, where much of the region occupied by the Celts still bears traces of megalithic monuments. End quote. Jean Marcal, The Celts. Despite the best efforts of clerics and historians, it is only the last group of invaders, the Milesians, who can positively be identified as coming to Ireland from the east for the first time. The story of the visitation of the Milesians is of central importance to our work. I explore this race in greater detail in later chapters. What interests me is that these Milesians, descendants of the Scythians, have been linked with the Israelites whose exodus from Egypt occurred after the fall of Akhenaten after 1330 BC. Historians date the Milesian invasion to between 500 and 600 BC. However, I believe they were in Ireland at least 1,000 years before. Officially posited dates, a theory being slowly and reluctantly confirmed by new discoveries. Interestingly, a daughter of Akhenaten, nicknamed Scota or Scotia, is believed to have accompanied the Milesians on their journey to Ireland. Her real name was Meritaten, and she, or a namesake descendant, lies buried in County Kerry. It is from the time of the Milesian invasion that Ireland's so-called historical cycle begins. According to records and accounts, the Milesians regarded their predecessors, the Tuatha De Danann, as nothing less than gods. Quote, by the Milesians and their descendants they were regarded as gods, and ultimately, in the imagination of the people, they became what are now in Ireland called fairies. They conquered the Firbolgs, an Iberian or a Belgic people, at the Battle of Moytura. End quote. Old Celtic Romances, 1894, translated by P.W. Joyce. Quote, the meaning formerly given to Tuatha De Danann was the men of science who were gods. Denan being here connected with Dan, knowledge. End quote. J.A. McCulloch, The Religion of the Ancient Celts. Quote, the Irish World Chronicles, a section in the Annals of It Has Fallen that covers the historical period from the creation of the world to AD 432, says that the Tuatha De Danann were mythical masters of Ireland in around 1500 BC, before the arrival of the Sons of Mill. End quote. Maurice Cotterell, Jesus, King Arthur, and the Journey of the Grail. Quote, the Tuatha De Danann seem to have been a civilized people. Besides possessing ships and armies and working in the metals, they had an organized body of surgeons whose duty it was to attend upon the wounded in battle. And they also had a bardic or druid class to preserve the history of the country and the dead deeds of kings and heroes. End quote. Ignatius Donnelly. Duplicitous historians, desperate to conceal the western origins of the De Danann, erroneously insist that they were related to the Danes, Trojans, or tribe of Dan. They have sought to arouse doubt as to whether the De Danann Magi of Ireland were of the Caucasian, Indo-European race. However, it is not that De Danann were descended from the tribe of Dan, but that the biblical Danites were related, either racially or ideologically, to the western De Danann. In any case, after their final defeat at the hands of the Milesian Gaels, the De Danann supposedly transmuted their physical form to become the mysterious She, or Dei Terreni, gods of the earth, that is, the fairy race who reputedly inhabited the inner earth. Quote, of all the beings in the Irish mythological world, the She are, however, apparently the oldest and most distinctive. Beside them in literature and general renown, all other beings sink into insignificance. A belief in them formerly dominated the whole of Irish life. The She, or Tuatha De Danann, were a people like ourselves who inhabited the hills, not as a rule the highest and most salient eminences, but I think more usually the pleasant undulating slopes or gentle hillsides, and who lived there a life of their own, marrying or giving in marriage, banqueting or making war, and leading there just as real a life as is our own. All Irish literature abounds with reference to them. End quote. W. Y. Evans Wentz, The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, 1911. The term Tuatha, from the Old Irish root tuath, does mean tribe. However, the term comes from the same root as thuaid, meaning northern or northern point. The De Danann were from the northwest, as their own legend stated. They were the Hyperboreans and were clearly ancestors of the so-called Teutons, the early Germanic tribe. The word is connotatively related to Old Irish tuas or thuas, meaning up or above, to tuath, that signified sorcerers or magicians, and to tuath jinti, meaning elven, fairy, or blessed good folk. The term Danu relates to the Irish goddess of that name. She was a goddess of art, craft, and beauty. Some scholars prefer, therefore, to regard and describe the Tuatha De Danann as people of art, or the artful ones. I think this is an accurate title given the exquisiteness of their craftsmanship in silver and stone. Quote, Colonel Valenci has proved, as clear as the sun at noon, that the ancient gods of the Greeks and Romans came from the Hyperboreans. End quote. Godfrey Higgins. Such a great people were the De Danann, and so uncommonly skilled in the few arts of the time, that they dazzled even their conquerors and successors, the Milesians, into regarding them as mighty magicians. Later generations of the Milesians, to whom were handed down the wonderful traditions of the wonderful people that they had conquered, lifted them into the mystic realm, their greatest ones becoming gods and goddesses who supplied to their successors a beautiful mythology. End quote. Seamus McManus, Story of the Irish Race. According to their own lore, found in the Liber Gabala, or Book of Invasions, the Didanan were survivors from 4 paradisiacal western Atlantic islands that either foundered or suffered enormous natural assaults during an immense natural catastrophe or flood. These original homelands were known as Phalias, Murias, Gorias, and Phineas. It is most curious that the island named Murias should be so similar to Lemuria. If we take the letter L to represent the, then Lemuria is undoubtedly the Murias of the Didanan. Didanan lore speaks also of several other enchanted isles that played a major role in the adventures of their various heroes, kings, and gods. The chief characters from the myths of the Didanan are Danu, also known as Dana, Anna, or Anu. She was mother of the gods and head of the pre-Celtic pantheon. The syllable of her name An appears universally as a reference to the sky, the heavens, and divinity. In Celtic, the name Danu means swift flowing waters. Bridget, a later form of Danu, her name may be the origin of bride, bright, and Brit, as found in Britain. In the east, she was known as Barat and Baratana. Bel, Danu's consort, also known as Baal, Baal, Beli, and Belus, etc. He appears in Norse mythology as Balder, and his name gives us terms such as Baltic, Belgrade, Belarus, Belfast, Beltane, Beltany, etc. Ernemas, a mother goddess and granddaughter of Nuada. Fodla, Banba, and Eri were her daughters. Nuada Ergedlam, Nuada of the Silver Arm, was High King of the Tuatha De Danann. He was the original solar hero upon whom Arthur, Hercules, Gilgamesh, and others were based. He is allegedly interred at County Donegal at Grianan Isleach. His name can be rendered Nada or Noah, or Nua. The biblical Noah was patterned after this savior of his people and builder of the original ark. Lu, the sun god entitled Samildanak, or Master of all arts. The Old Testament King David was patterned after Lu, as was the New Testament's Luke, Saint Luke. He was worshipped in many forms throughout the world, appearing as Lud, Lu, Lugus, Logos, and Lugal. His cult spread into Europe and Asia Minor. In Mesopotamia they appear as the mysterious Luvians or Luwians. In the Old Testament we find the cult referred to by the term Levites, the enigmatic 13th tribe of the so-called Israelites. Places such as the Isle of Lewis, Lewisham, and Lourdes, etc. are named after him. St. Paul's Cathedral was deliberately constructed over his ancient temple in London. The very name London coming from Ludunum or Ludunum, meaning Lu's castle. Dagda, a god of plenty similar to Hercules and Pluto. Manannan MacLear, god of the sea, prototype for Poseidon and Neptune. He reappears in fiction as Shakespeare's King Lear. Angus, son of Dagda, he was god of love and king of the faerie. Midir, god of the underworld, of the Sidhe, he was married to the most beautiful woman in the world, Etain. The saga of Midir and Etain is the oldest romance in recorded history. Ogma, god of strength and language, prototype for Mercury and Hermes. The Ogham alphabet derives from his name. Dian Kekt, god of medicine and healing, he fashioned the strange silver arm for Nuada. Goibniu, or Goban, was smith of the gods and prototype of Vulcan and Hephaestus. Cair was poet, enchanter, and prototype of Merlin and Taliesin. Irmed, healer associated with herbalism. She was the daughter of physician Dian Kekt and sister of Miak, a prototype of Osiris. Morrigu, or Morrigan, the Terror, was Didanan's raven queen and battle queen. A prototype for Morgana Le Fay, she was probably the prototype for the infamous biblical Lilith. Her sisters, the original graces or muses, were Bav, Nimane, and Macha. Morrigu was a consort of High King Nuada. Her name is derived from the Gaelic Mor, meaning great one or giant, and Regan, meaning queen. Bav, the Fury. She was sister to Morrigu and also a war queen. Her name means vulture or battle crow. Macha, the third great war queen, buried at Ard Macha, or County Armagh. She flew over the enemy and collected their severed heads after the slaughter. The collection was referred to as Macha's acorn crop. Boann, wife of the Dagda, she was goddess of rivers. The Boyne River was named after her. The ancient complex of Newgrange is situated on the bank of this river. The Dedannen arrived to the shores of Ireland on the first day of May, the Irish Beltane, or Day of Bel, god of the sun. They brought with them 4 treasures or sacred symbols of their race. These treasures were the Sword of Nuada, known as Retaliator. It was the prototype for the Arthurian Excalibur. The Lance of Lu. It operated under its own power during battle. The Cauldron of Dagda, a pot of plenty that never ran dry. It had the power to return life to dead warriors. The Stone of Manannan Mac Lir, also known as the Lia Fail or Stone of Fall. It was subsequently appropriated by the Milesian Gaelic kings and allegedly became the coronation stone of British monarchs. Interestingly, these 4 druidic artifacts are understood to be the exact prototypes of the 4 suits found in the tarot and traditional playing cards. These suits are known as the wands, swords, cups, and discs, or clubs, spades, hearts, and diamonds. There were 4 cities in which the Tuatha De Danann learnt wisdom and magic. These are the names of the cities: Phalias and Findias, Gorias and Murias. From Phalias was brought the Lia Fail, which is at Tara, and which used to cry out under each king who assumed the sovereignty of Ireland. From Gorias was brought the sword which belonged to Nuada. From Findias was brought the spear of Lug. And from Murias was brought the cauldron of the Dagda. No battle was maintained against the spear of Lug or against him who had it in his hand. No one escaped the sword of Nuada after he had been wounded by it, and when it was drawn from its warlike scabbard, no one could resist against him who had it in his hand. Never went an assembly of guests away unsatisfied from the cauldron of the Dagda. And the Lia Fail, which is at Tara, never spoke except under a king of Ireland. And that was from the 4 jewels of the Tuatha De Danann in the Yellow Book of Lecan. Wherever the Tuatha De Danann came from, earth or heaven, they landed in a dense cloud upon the coast of Ireland on the mystic 1st of May without having been opposed or even noticed. That those might still be ignorant of their coming, the Morrigu, helped by Bav and Macha, made use of the magic they had learned in Findias, Gorias, Murias, and Phalias. They spread druidically formed showers and fog-sustaining showerheads over the country, and caused the air to pour down fire and blood upon the Fir Bolg, so that they were obliged to shelter themselves for 3 days and 3 nights. End quote, Charles Squire, Celtic Myth and Legend. According to the legends, the Dedannen were obliged to fight wars against the resident Fomorians and Iberian Fir Bolg in an attempt to gain control over the country. The conflict with the Fir Bolg commenced in Western Ireland in what is now County Sligo. The Dedannen and Fir Bolg were of the same race, and after their combat, Ireland was divided between them. Quote, "It was on Midsummer Day that the opposing armies at last met. The people of the goddess Danu appeared in a flaming line, wielding their red-bordered, speckled, and firm shields. Opposite to them were ranged the Fir Bolgs, sparkling, brilliant, and flaming, with their swords, spears, blades, and trowel spears." End quote, Charles Squire, Celtic Myth and Legend. The Fir Bolg get their name from Fir, meaning men, and Bel, meaning fair or beautiful, or from Belos, meaning shining or bright. They may have been worshippers of the primordial god Bel. Given that this is the origin of their name, it logically follows that the Bolg and their 2 related tribes, Fir Gallion and Fir Domnan, had evacuated their ancient homeland and made their way to Greece and Bulgaria. I believe the word Bulgaria is derived from the name of the Fir Bolg. And some evidence exists to suggest that this Irish race plays a significant role in the development of that land's ancient culture. The letters B and V were often interchanged. Place names such as the Volga may derive from Bolg. In order to conceal the real meaning of the name Bolg, duplicitous historians have translated the name as Bags and idiotically labeled the Fir Bolg Men of the Bags. This is because the word Bolg is close to terms denoting long trousers and also small boats made from leather. The great scholar Godfrey Higgins silenced this drivel and explained in his monumental works that Bolg was really derived from a word meaning wisdom. To Higgins, the Fir Bolg were the men of wisdom. Upon this fact I concur. I have little doubt that they were magi from the pre-Diluvian epoch who had strayed into European lands but whose original homeland was Ireland or Atlantis. This fact is known to a few historians, although most will not openly admit it. They know what it would mean for their careers if they broke consensus. Quote, the prehistoric invaders of legend, the Fir Bolg, were said to have spent 2 centuries in exile in the east after being driven out by the Fomorians. End quote, Bob Quinn, The Atlantean Irish. The word Baal signified a sacred tree, and it is therefore possibly that the Fir Bolg, when their name is correctly translated, were men of the trees. This would equate them with the Druids and with kingship, since the symbolism of kings and trees was closely related. Men who carried leather bags, men who wore trousers, or tree kings. Which one of these titles sounds most likely to have distinguished a remarkable race of goddess worshippers who ruled Ireland for centuries from their beautifully positioned capital at Tara? The answer is obvious. Quote, the incarnate god was probably representative of a god or spirit of earth, growth, or vegetation, represented also by a tree. A symbolic branch of such a tree was borne by kings, and perhaps by druids, who used oak branches in their rites. King and tree would be connected, the king's life being bound up in that of the tree. The Irish Baal or sacred tree, connected with the king's, must not be touched by any impious hand, and it was sacrilege to cut it down. End quote, J. A. McCulloch, The Religion of the Ancient Celts. The word Bolg may also be rendered Belg, and since the letter B was often interchanged with the similar sounding letter P, Belg can be rendered Pelg. The words Bolg or Belg, as I say, could have been an origin of Bulgaria. Pelg might be the origin of Pelasgian, the name of the ancestors of the Hellenes or Greeks. Grecian historians admit that the Pelasgians, their name meant men of the sea, originated in western climes. The Bolgs, Belegs, or Pelegs may have been named after the sun god Bel, which is why they were called the Shining or Bright Ones. It may derive from the fact that they were handsome in appearance. After all, the famous Helen of Troy was reported to be comely and radiant. Her name is akin to Helios, the name of the sun. That is what I suspect occurred with the Fir Bolg. The Fir Bolg divided Ireland into 5 provinces which still exist today. They are Ulster, Munster, Leinster, Connaught, and Meath. The symbolism found on the heraldry of each county is an interesting study. Other words and place names referencing Bel are Belfast, Belgrade, Belarus, Beltane, Baltic, and Balder. According to texts dating from the 11th century, the Tuatha De Danann's battle with the Fomorians, known in Gaelic as Magture na Beformac, because it was fought on the northern plain of Moytura in County Sligo, proved to be a different kettle of fish to that which occurred between them and the Fir Bolg. For one thing, it involved years of concerted methodical preparation under the direction of the sun god Lu. Apparently the Fomorians were a somewhat demonic hybrid race similar to the Titans. They allegedly harassed every tribe that attempted to seek refuge in Ireland. They decimated the children of Partholan and harassed the Numidians to the point of extinction. The Iberians, Fir Bolg, were able to resist Fomorian assaults due to their larger numbers, but failed to defeat them outright. The Fomorian princes had their headquarters on Tory Island north of Derry City in County Donegal. Their name allegedly derives from the Gaelic famhair, or Welsh for, meaning giant, and from fo, under, muir, sea. Alternatively, the name could certainly derive from fo morio, meaning great ones. The name of their king, Ilathan, has been connected to words that denote knowledge. I conclude that the Fomori or Fomorians were not from under the sea, but from the civilizations that had sunk beneath the sea. The legends state that 2 Fomorian kings, Mark and Conan, had built what is clearly described as a glass tower on Tory Island. From this tower they kept a close watch over the mainland by way of a magical lens made of crystal. Brea's mother was a Dedanan, and by way of her he had a legitimate claim to the throne of the children of Danu. However, after assuming the throne, he decided to side with his father's race and subsequently hard-pressed the Dedanan with taxes and unfair judgments. His actions precipitated the final conflict between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. Quote, "In spite of Brys being so beautiful, his reign brought no great good luck to his people, for the Fomor, whose dwelling place was beyond the sea, or as some say, below the sea, westward, began putting tribute on them, that way they would get them under their own rule. It was a long time before the Fomor came to Ireland. Dreadful they were to look at, and maimed." End quote. Lady Gregory, Gods and Fighting Men, 1904. For 7 years, Lugh had the Dedanan people prepare for what had been described as the Irish Mahabharata. The Fomorians were destroyed, and the war queens of the Dedanan, led by the Morrigu, pursued the Fomorians in the form of wolves and ravens until all were caught and slain. As a traditional poem on the war recounts, quote, "Over his head is shrieking a lean hag, quickly hopping over the points of the weapons and shields. She is the grey-haired Morrigu." During the war with the Fomorians, commenced in the sign of Scorpio at the eve of Samhain, the Dedanan summoned the assistance of the earth itself. The mountains, rivers, and lakes came to their assistance and obeyed the commands of the Dedanan magi and poets. Quote, "We will hurl by our magic arts," replied Mathgan, the head sorcerer, "the 12 mountains of Ireland at the Fomors. These mountains will be Slieve League, Denaulad, the Mourne Mountains, Bree Ruri, Slieve Bloom, Slieve Snecta, Slemish, Blai Sliab, Nefin, Sliab Maku, Belgodon, Siges, and Cruachan Eigel. We will hide away by magic the 12 chief lakes and the 12 chief rivers of Ireland from the Fomors, so that they shall not be able to find any water, however thirsty they may be. Those waters will conceal themselves from the Fomors, so that they shall not get a drop, while they will give drink to the people of the goddess Danu as long as the war lasts, even if it lasts 7 years. And they told Lugh that the 12 chief lakes were Lough Derg, Lough Lumni, Lough Corrib, Lough Ree, Lough Mask, Strangford Lough, Lough Leg, Lough Ni, Lough Foyle, Lough Gara, Lough Reg, and Marloch, and that the 12 chief rivers were the Bush, the Boyne, the Ban, the Nem, the Lee, the Shannon, the Moy, the Sligo, the Erne, the Finn, the Liffey, and the Suir. End quote, from Celtic Myth and Legend by Charles Squire. Quote, "Then the kings and chief men of the men of Ireland took their armour on them, and they raised the points of their spears over their heads, and they made close fences of their shields. And they attacked their enemies, and their enemies answered them. And they threw their whining spears at one another, and when their spears were broken, they drew their swords from their blue-bordered sheaths and began to strike at one another. And thickets of brown flames rose above them from the bitterness of their many-edged weapons." End quote. Lady Gregory, Gods and Fighting Men. The battle was commemorated in stone because wherever a warrior and hero fell, a cairn, dolmen, stone circle, or other kind of stone monument was later erected. The resulting megalithic conglomeration, although not well known, is one of the most awe-inspiring in the world. Sadly, most of the sites have been desecrated and ruined. Over the generations, local farmers have plundered the tombs of large rocks in order to bolster walls between their pastures. The great supporting stones have also been used for the building of nearby houses and churches. The area near the town of Cong, not far from the battlefields, is honeycombed with underground rivers, tunnels, and caves. These underground locations have long been regarded as the haunts of the fairy and preternatural Sidhe. Quote, "Megalithic structures of almost every kind are found among them. Stone cairns with dolmens in their interiors, dolmens standing open and alone, dolmens surrounded by 1, 2, or 3 circles of stones, and circles without dolmens, to the number of over 100. 64 of such prehistoric remains stand together upon an elevated plateau not more than a mile across, and make the battlefield of Moytura, though the least well known, perhaps the most impressive of all primeval ruins. What they really commemorated we may never know, but in all probability the place was the scene of some important and decisive early battle, the monuments marking the graves of the chieftains who were interred as the result of it." End quote. Charles Squire, Celtic Myth and Legend. The Dedanan, like many who came after their time, looked to the west as the place of repose after death. If the homelands of the Irish had been in Eastern Europe or in Asia, it is not likely that their spiritual yearning would have been to that hemisphere and not the western waters of the Atlantic. The love of northern and western lands of eternal youth and joy existed due to the race memories of the ancient homelands lost after Earth's past cataclysms. Quote, "A land of youth, a land of rest, a land from sorrow free, it lies far off in the golden west on the verge of the azure sea. A swift canoe of crystal bright that never met mortal view, we shall reach the land ere fall of night in that strong and swift canoe. We shall reach the strand of that sunny land, the land of rest in the golden west." End quote. Traditional poem on the west. Quote, "Though they came to learned Erin without buoyant adventurous ships, no man in creation knew whether they were of the earth or of the sky." End quote. Poem on the Didanen from the Book of Ballymote. After their hard-won victory, the Didanen gathered their people to the nearby mountains and proclaimed thanks to their goddess. The war queen Bav, prototype for the Egyptian goddesses Sekhmut and Mut, offered forth a striking prophecy about future ages, the twilight of the gods, and decline of spirituality and morality. Her vision and words are uncannily similar to those preserved by the Skalds in the Norse Edda and by the Hindus in the post-Vedic Puranas. Quote, "Then she added a prophecy in which she foretold the approaching end of the divine age and the coming of a new one, in which the summers would be flowerless, the cows milkless, and women shameless, and men strengthless, in which there would be trees without fruit and seas without fish, when old men would give false judgments and legislators would make unjust laws, when warriors would betray one another and men would be thieves, and there would be no more virtue in the world." End quote. Prophecy of Bav, war queen of the Tuatha De Danann. Quote, "Then saw she wade in heavy streams men, foul murderers and perjurers, and them who others' wives seduce to sin, brothers slay brothers, sisters' children shed each other's blood. Hard is the world, sensual sin grows huge. These are the sword ages, axe ages, shields are cleft in twain, storm ages, murder ages, till the world falls dead." End quote. The Norse Edda, Volupsu, the Wise Woman's Prophecy. Quote, "There will be contemporary monarchs reigning over the earth, kings of churlish spirit, violent temper, and ever addicted to falsehood and wickedness. They will inflict death on women, children, and cows. They will seize upon the property of their subjects and be intent upon the wives of others. They will be of unlimited power. Their lives will be short, their desires insatiable. People of various countries intermingling with them will follow their example. Wealth and piety will decrease until the world will be wholly depraved. Property alone will confer rank. Wealth will be the only source of devotion. Passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes. Falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation, and women will be objects merely of sensual gratification. External types will be the only distinction of the several orders of life. A man, if rich, will be reputed pure. Dishonesty, anyaya, will be the universal means of subsistence. Weakness will be the cause of dependence. Menace and presumption will be substituted for learning. Liberality will be devotion. Mutual assent, marriage. Fine clothes, dignity. He who is the strongest will reign. The people, unable to bear the heavy burden, load of taxes, will take refuge among the valleys. Thus, in the Kali age, will decay constantly proceed, until the human race approaches its annihilation." End quote. The Vishnu Purana. Clearly, the powers that be do not want us to realize the elements of civilization originated in Western climes and from the pre-Diluvian civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria. The desire of Vatican mythographers was to falsely situate the seat of culture in the Middle East and as far away from the Atlantic zone as possible. They knew that Ireland was a remnant of Atlantis and that its primordial megalithic inhabitants had been evacuated to the continent en masse. If we therefore find, as we do, apparently Semitic or Judaic symbols on the heraldry of Europe, we do so because of the earlier traversals of Western peoples. Quote, "The peoples and kingdoms referred to in the Bible and supposed by commentators to be in the East are actually to be found in the West." End quote. Anna Wilkes, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees, 1873. Quote, "It shall be our effort to show that not only Celtic tongues and literature, but the histories of distinct nations point all in one direction, and that the materials of modern science are daily contributing to the proof of prehistoric Europe being the seat of many places and peoples mentioned in the Holy Writ." Ibid. Quote, "One of the aims of the propaganda for spreading misinformation regarding Ireland was to create an impression, because of the similarity between the customs of the Irish and those of the Hindus, that the Irish and their customs came from the East." End quote, Conor McDarry. The Eastern peoples who brought their customs and symbols during later migrations possessed them due to earlier commerce with Western tribes. This latter scenario has been thoroughly covered up in favor of the former thesis that centers the answers on east to west migrations. Although this explanation may answer a few puzzles, it leaves many more unsolved. For every revelation, we get a dozen other historical puzzles to befuddle us. And this is what the fabricators of history have long desired. Men are not meant to know the truth about their origins. They are meant to be forever chasing false leads. The works and vagrant ideas of the fabricators are given the limelight, and year after year, decade after decade, we are compelled, for lack of the right diet, to ingest desolate and problematic theories. All the while, the reason of man is violated as he slips further away into apathy and ignorance. The chaotic state of the world and of man's consciousness is a consequence of ages of lies and deception. It is time to do something about it. It is time to reestablish the fact that it was Ireland, not Rome, that was, as the historians love to assert, the vagina gentium, womb of nations. The Romans who rose to fall into oblivion in a historical instant were not the fathers of civilization any more than the Hellenes or Greeks. Those who professed such lies, and still do, are either sorely misinformed or deliberately duplicitous. What we need to remember is that the Greek civilization only began in earnest as late as 800 BC, after they adopted the Phoenician, Cadmean alphabet. During the time of Homer, in the 8th century BC, the known world of the Greeks was from their own country to Italy and nearby parts of Egypt and the Middle East. Not very far. School books remind us of the fantastic reports of Greek traveler and historian Herodotus concerning life beyond the known horizon. Our point is that the Greek civilization and the first Grecian journalism on foreign parts came centuries after the rise of the Irish and their worldwide civilizations. Quote, "He did at least take the trouble to visit Egypt to gather his stories, unlike Greeks before him, who simply repeated gossip derived at the local dock from sailors and merchants. However, the farther Herodotus progresses from Greece, the less reliable and more wild his tales become. On the northern edge of Asia, he describes a people who have hooves like goats, eat their dead fathers, and sleep 6 months of the year." End quote, Philip Freeman, The Philosopher and the Druids. Quote, "The early Greek writers knew little of Western Europe, and Herodotus could only inform us that the western extremity was occupied by a people whom he terms the Sinatae, and that all the countries next to them were said to be inhabited by the Celtae or Celts. He said he had an indistinct notion of the British Isles." Another Greek historian, Polybius, who wrote very little more than 150 years before the Christian era, adds nothing to our knowledge on the subject. End quote, Thomas Wright, The Celts, Romans, and the Saxon, 1861. Greek historians and writers were not authorities on the origins and nature of Western peoples, and their reports on the Irish and other world cultures are not to be accepted as accurate. The same thing goes for the Romans. The Romans conquered the world, yes, but they were reluctant to let the world they owned remember that there had once been an Irish empire in existence long before their own. Quote, "The 3rd century BC was also the age of the beginnings of Latin literature. Ironically, few, if any, of these writings were by native Romans, for until the defeat of Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, at Beneventum in 275 BC, and the consequent conquest of southern Italy's culturally rich cities, the Romans had little impetus to produce literature." End quote, Paul R. Lonergan, The Druids, Priests of the Ancient Celts. Quote, "While it is most certainly true that the great cities and states in the Near and Middle East were towering achievements, it is incorrect to regard them as the only flowering of civilization in the world at that time." End quote, Arthur Kemp, March of the Titans. Quote, in the Mahabharata, written some centuries after the Ramayana, mention is made of Svetadvipa, the White Island. The old sage instructs Narada as to the situation of the White Island, telling him that it lies to the northwest of Mount Meru, the abode of the gods and the demigods in Central Asia. The Isle of Britain is called the Welsh Iwen Innes, i.e. the White Island. The Holy Grail or Sankt Graal is said by Celtic authors to have been brought to the White Isle, and that the White Isle is part of England. End quote. Dorothy Chaplin, Matter, Myth, and Spirit, or Celtic and Hindu Links. Quote, the island of Caul, the territory of a branch of MacLeans, was formerly called Kelis or Keolas. As in Bolivia, we find a name uncommonly like the Sanskrit Kailas, the sacred abode of Siva on the Himalayan mountains. Quote, the Hindus have never within the knowledge of man sent out colonies for fleets of exploration, but there is abundant evidence on the other hand, or migrations from Atlantis eastward. How could the Sanskrit writings have preserved the maps of Ireland, England, and Spain, giving the shape and outline of their coasts and their very names, and yet have preserved no memory of the expeditions or colonizations by which they acquired that knowledge? End quote, Ignatius Donnelly. Quote, Miles Dillon and D.A. Binchy have both for some time now advanced the idea of the common derivation of the Hindu and Celtic traditions. Binchy has brought focus to bear on each of their legal systems, while Calvert Watkins has attempted to show that the 7-syllable verse used in Old Irish has the same origin as that of the Indian Rig Veda. Dillon concludes that such evidence attests to the common heritage of the Druid and the Brahmin. End quote, Paul R. Lonigan, The Druids, Priests of the Ancient Celts. Naturally, we cannot sympathize with establishment hierarchs who have commissioned travesties of history, but we can understand the motives behind their deceptiveness and ingenious rescripting of history. Their ingenuity was and is the result of their need to obscure what occurred in pre-Diluvian ages. And since the Irish culture stands out as too advanced to have come from nowhere, interest had to be directed elsewhere. Consequently, the mythographers cunningly reversed the truth and centered the cradle of civilization in the East. This falsified history works for us, as long as we regard the Neolithic Age as the beginning of human civilization. Quote, the area covered by the Celtic domain at the height of its expansion in the 3rd century BC was enormous, encompassing no less than the British Isles, France, the western Iberian Peninsula, a large part of northern Italy, most of Germany, the Low Countries, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, a major portion of the Balkans, and Galatia in Asia Minor. And we have reason to assume that as far as the Celtic realm extended, so did the power and influence of the Druids. Everywhere evidence speaks strongly for the cultural, if not political, unity of the people. End quote, Paul R. Lonigan. The Druids, Priests of the Ancient Celts, 1996. There's Herodotus. 484 to 425 BC, he's considered the father of history. He was the first writer to mention the so-called Celts. However, his information on the subject is paltry. Similarly, the historian Timaeus, who wrote during the 3rd century, gives us nothing but a single line about the religion and pantheon of the Celts. As said, the genocide of the Druids and Bards is still little more than a footnote in most history books. And that is the end, chapter 4, right? And a little long, so I'll basically cut it here, but you can see that, there was a lot more to Irish history than we've been told, right? And the Atlanteans, right, ostensibly could be said to have resided in the island of Ireland, right? And the Fomorians of the prototypical Celtic mythology, were supposedly cyclops, right? They were giants, and, they were involved in building megalithic sites. Right, so that's chapter 4, and we'll be continuing on. Hope you guys enjoyed that one, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Ah.